By the time Raymond Carter walked out of the building, the people who had just fired him were already laughing. He could hear them through the glass. Not clearly, just the shape of it. The pitch. The way laughter sounds when it has no self-consciousness. When the people laughing are certain they won't be overheard by anyone who matters. Raymond didn't turn around. He carried a single box. It wasn't even full. A coffee mug, a charging cable, a framed photo of his daughter on her first day of high school. 3 weeks of work, and that was all there was to carry out. He had traveled light on purpose. The elevator came. He stepped in. The doors closed, and for a moment it was just him and his reflection in the brushed steel, a man in his mid-40s, jacket pressed, expression unreadable. He pressed the lobby button. He did not press it twice. 3 weeks earlier, Raymond Carter had arrived at Aldridge Meridian Consulting on a Monday morning in early March, introduced himself to the front desk as the new senior analyst transferred from the firm's Denver office, and been shown to a desk on the 11th floor that someone had clearly not bothered to prepare. The chair was broken. The monitor cable was missing. There was a sticky note on the keyboard that said temp storage in red marker, as if the space itself was uncertain about his arrival. Raymond set down his bag, found a working cable in an empty drawer 3 desks over, and got started. He had been doing things like that his entire career, finding the cable, not waiting to be told where it was. The 11th floor of Aldridge Meridian was a mid-sized operations and client services division, 40-some people arranged in open clusters, managed by a regional director named Brooke Langford. Brooke ran the floor with the specific energy of someone who had decided, early in their career, that visibility was more important than competence, and had spent the subsequent decade proving the theory profitable. She was well-dressed, quick with names, and politically precise. She knew which partners played golf on Thursdays, and which ones needed their emails answered in under 4 minutes. She also had a habit of standing behind people when they were on calls. Raymond noticed it the first day. The second day, he watched it happen to a data coordinator named Philip Osee, a quiet, meticulous man in his early 30s who had clearly been on the floor long enough to have stopped noticing. Brooke stood 2 feet behind him while he walked a client through a reconciliation issue, and she made a single, small noise, not a word, just a breath, when Osee paused to check a figure. He didn't look up. He already knew she was there. He had simply learned to keep going. Raymond filed that away. The third day, a woman named Carla Nwaneri arrived at her desk to find that a report she had spent 2 days drafting had been submitted under someone else's name. The someone else was a man named Brett Ashford, 3 years Carla's junior, recently promoted to team lead despite having, as far as Raymond could observe, no particular aptitude for anything except confidence. Brett didn't even flinch when Carla brought it up. He said the final version had gone through him, and what went through him had his name on it. Carla sat back down. She pulled up a new document and started over. Raymond was watching from across the cluster. He had not been asked for his opinion. He did not offer it, but he noted the date. He noted the file name in the version history, which was visible from where he was sitting. He noted the timestamp. He was there to observe. That was the whole point. Aldridge Meridian Consulting was, by most external measures, a healthy firm. Its client roster was strong. Its financials were clean. Its founding partner, a man named Henderson Carter, had built it over 22 years into something genuinely respected in the regional market, the kind of firm that didn't need to advertise because the work spoke for itself. Henderson was Raymond's father. Raymond had not told anyone on the 11th floor that. He had not told anyone in the building, except the firm's general counsel and one member of the board, both of whom had agreed, quietly in a conference room in Denver, that this was the right approach. There had been internal indicators for months, anomalies in performance reviews, turnover patterns that didn't match the firm's historical norms, client satisfaction scores drifting on certain accounts without a clear cause. Henderson had looked at the numbers and said, simply, "I need to know what's actually happening." Raymond was what happened next. He had done this before, at 2 other firms the family held interests in. He was good at it. He knew how to be forgettable. He knew how to ask questions that sounded like small talk. He knew how to sit in a room full of people who thought they were unobserved and simply wait for the room to show him what it was. The 11th floor showed him quite a bit. By the end of the first week, he had mapped the structure clearly. Brett Ashford and a senior account manager named Claudia Voss operated as a pair. Brett handled the visible work, the client-facing pieces, the presentations. Claudia handled the paper, the records, the way things got filed and attributed. Together they had, over approximately 14 months, systematically redirected credit for the floor's most significant outputs away from the people who had produced them and toward themselves, their performance metrics, and ultimately their compensation. The damage was specific. Raymond could see it in the numbers. 7 employees on the 11th floor had been passed over for advancement in the past year. 3 of them had received performance reviews that described their work as adequate but not distinguished. Reviews that did not match the actual outputs Raymond could trace through the file systems. The reviews had gone through Brooke Langford, who had signed them without apparent question. Carla Nwaneri was one of the 7. Philip Ozzie was another. Raymond spent his second week being careful about what he accessed and when. He worked late twice, not to be seen working late, but because it was quieter and he could think without interruption. He had a secondary credential, a consultant's access level, that allowed him to pull certain document histories without triggering alerts. He used it precisely in the evenings, and he kept a clean copy of everything he found on a personal device that had never touched the firm's network. That was the setup. The conflict came on a Thursday afternoon in week 3. It started with a client file. Raymond had been brought into a working group, nominally, to provide fresh perspective from the Denver office on a restructuring proposal for a mid-sized logistics client. It was a legitimate assignment. He had done the work genuinely, because doing the work genuinely was always better than doing it as cover. His analysis was sound. He knew it was sound because he had been doing this for 20 years. He shared access to the draft with Brett and Claudia, because that was how the floor worked. Everything went through Brett and Claudia. On Thursday morning, the working group had a presentation to the client. Raymond wasn't in the room. Brooke had decided the meeting was for established relationship leads. But he could see the calendar invite, and he could see that the slide deck submitted to the client contained, on its 3rd page, an attribution line that read, "Analysis prepared by B. Ashford and C. Voss Operations Team." His name was not on it, his methodology, his numbers, his framing. All of it was there. His name was not. He had expected something like this. He had not expected what came next. At 2 in the afternoon, Brooke Langford walked to his desk with the specific posture of someone who has rehearsed a conversation and is now delivering it. She told him there was a concern. She said it carefully. She said the firm had a policy around proprietary methodology, and that accessing client files beyond one's defined scope could be considered a compliance issue. Raymond looked at her. He said, "I was added to the working group." Brooke said she understood, but that the specific files he had accessed were beyond the scope of that addition, and that the IT team had flagged the access pattern. Raymond said, "I'd like to see the flag." Brooke said that wasn't how the process worked. He asked whether he could speak with the compliance officer. She said the compliance officer had already been briefed. Raymond sat with that for a moment. He recognized what was happening. He had seen versions of it before, in other contexts, the way institutional power, when it decides to move against someone, moves all at once, from every direction, so that there is no clear angle from which to push back. You question one thing and you are redirected to another. You ask for documentation and you are told the documentation is handled by someone you cannot reach. He said quietly, "Is this a formal proceeding?" Brooke said it wasn't formal yet, but that the partnership had been informed. He said all right. He went back to his work. At 4:30 she came back with someone from HR, a man named Kevin Stroud, who had the practiced gravity of a person who delivers bad news often enough to have become efficient at it. Kevin Stroud told Raymond that, given the compliance concern and the access irregularities, the firm was terminating his engagement effective immediately. He would be compensated for the full week. His credentials would be deactivated at 5 o'clock. Someone would walk him out. Raymond asked whether there was an appeal process. Kevin Stroud said there was, but that given the nature of the concerns, the partnership had elected to proceed with immediate separation. Raymond asked one more question. He asked who in the partnership had authorized the decision. Kevin Stroud named Brooke Langford and the regional managing partner, a man named Stuart Poole, who Raymond had spoken to exactly once at the coffee station on his first morning, and who had not, in that conversation, given any indication of knowing who Raymond was. That was probably accurate. Stuart Poole likely did not know. Raymond nodded. He thanked Kevin Stroud. He went to his desk and put his coffee mug, his charging cable, and the photo of his daughter into the box that Kevin Stroud's assistant had placed beside his chair. He carried the box to the elevator. He rode it to the lobby. He walked out through the glass doors into the March air, which was cold and flat and smelled faintly of rain. And then he stood on the sidewalk and made a phone call. The call lasted 4 minutes. The person on the other end was Margaret Osei, no relation to Philip, who was the firm's general counsel and one of 2 people in the building who knew exactly who Raymond Carter was. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 2 questions. He answered them. Then she said, "How do you want to handle the timing?" Raymond said, "Tomorrow morning, all hands, pull the board members who are in the city." Margaret said she could have it arranged by 9. She said, "9 is fine." He said one other thing before he hung up. He said, "Pull the full performance record for the 11th floor, all 7 flagged employees. And get me the version histories on the logistic proposal, the timestamped originals." Margaret said she had already begun pulling them. He said, "Good." He put his phone in his pocket. He picked up the box. He walked to where he had parked that morning, put the box in the back seat, and drove home. He had dinner with his daughter, Nora, who was 17, and was working on a history paper about the labor movement, and wanted to know what he thought about the Pullman strike. He told her what he thought. She disagreed with part of it. He said she might be right. He went to bed at 10:30. The all-hands meeting was called for 9 the next morning. The message came from Henderson Carter's office. Henderson himself, whose name most of the 11th floor knew only from the firm's letterhead and the portrait near the elevator bank on the 40th floor. The message said attendance was mandatory, building-wide, and that the atrium on the 2nd floor had been reserved. Raymond arrived at 8:50. He came in through the main entrance. He was wearing the same jacket as the day before. He had the box under his arm, the same box with the same coffee mug and charging cable and photo of his daughter. He carried it the way someone carries something familiar, not dramatically, just present. He went directly to the atrium. The room filled slowly. People came in clusters, the way people do when they don't know why they've been called together. Cautious, murmuring, reading the room. Raymond stood near the front and watched them arrive. He saw Brett Ashford come in with Claudia Voss. They were talking about something else entirely. Brett was animated. Claudia looked mildly annoyed, which seemed to be her default state. He saw Brooke Langford arrive with Stuart Poole, who was already checking his phone. He saw Philip Osei come in near the back and choose a seat against the wall, the way someone chooses a seat when they have learned that walls are safer than open spaces. He saw Carla Nuaneri sit down next to Philip, and Philip say something to her quietly, and Carla shake her head slightly, the way someone shakes their head when they don't know what to make of a situation, but they don't have the energy to be surprised. Raymond watched all of it. Henderson Carter came in at 9:02. He was 71 years old and walked like a man who had been somewhere important once and had never fully left. He went to the front of the room and waited for the room to settle. When it did, he said, "Good morning." He said, 22 years ago, I started this firm with a very specific idea about what it would be, not just about what services it would offer or what markets it would serve, about what kind of place it would be for the people inside it. I want to be honest with you this morning. I've had some reason to think we've moved away from that, and I've had some reason to think I should have looked more carefully sooner." He paused. He said, "My son has been working on this floor for 3 weeks. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the quiet itself is information. Henderson looked toward Raymond. Raymond set the box down on a nearby chair. He moved to the front of the room and stood next to his father, and for a moment the two of them simply existed in that space together, and every person in the atrium made their own private calculation about what that meant. Raymond said, "My name is Raymond Carter. I'm a principal in the Carter Family Holdings, which is the majority stakeholder in Aldridge Meridian. I was here in an operational review capacity. I want to be clear about what that means and what I found." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He said, "There are 7 employees on this floor whose performance records, as officially documented, do not match the work they actually produced. I have version histories, timestamps, and access logs that establish this clearly. Those records will be reviewed by an independent HR audit team beginning this afternoon, and the findings will be used to correct the performance record for each of those individuals, retroactively for the relevant period." He let that settle for a moment. He said, "I also want to address what happened yesterday. I was terminated from my position here based on a compliance concern that, I can now confirm, was fabricated. The access irregularity that was cited did not occur. The records were altered after the fact. The people responsible for that alteration and for the broader pattern of record manipulation on this floor have already been identified." He looked briefly at Brett Ashford. Brett had gone very still. Claudia Voss was looking at the floor. Brooke Langford was looking at Henderson Carter, and Henderson Carter was not looking back at her. Raymond said, 3 individuals will receive formal termination notices by end of business today. A 4th situation, involving oversight responsibility at the management level, is under review and will be addressed separately. He didn't name them. He didn't need to. He said, I want to speak directly to the people whose work was misrepresented. I want you to know that what happened to you was documented, that it will be corrected in the official record, and that going forward the firm intends to establish a direct reporting mechanism that does not run through a single point of failure. Philip Ossie, in the back of the room, looked up for the first time. Carla Nwaneri's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to read. Not relief exactly, not yet, more like the particular exhaustion of someone who has been proved right about something they wished they had been wrong about. Raymond said, That's what I have. If you have questions, the General Counsel will be available this afternoon. Thank you for your time. He stepped back. Henderson said a few more words about the audit, about next steps, about his commitment to the process, and then the meeting was over. The room didn't empty all at once. It never does after something like that. People moved in clusters, the way they'd arrived, but differently now, quieter, with a particular weight of people recalibrating. Raymond stayed near the front. He watched. He wasn't surprised by who came to him and who didn't. Brett Ashford did not come to him. Claudia Voss did not come to him. Brooke Langford started toward him once, then changed direction. He watched her stop midway across the room and say something to Stuart Poole, who shook his head very slightly, and then they both stood there, and Raymond moved on. Philip Ossie came to him near the door. He wasn't sure what Philip was going to say. People in Philip's situation handled moments like this very differently, some with relief, some with a complicated anger, some with a numbness that looked like calm. Philip said, The Norcott client report. From November, that was mine, Raymond said. I know. I have the timestamped draft. It's in the file. Philip was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Thank you. Raymond nodded. Carla Nwaneri found him in the hallway near the elevator. She didn't say much either. She said, I put in my notice in January. I took it back because I couldn't afford not to. I've been trying to figure out whether that was the right call. Raymond said, What made you take it back? She said, My daughter just started school. Private school, it's expensive. He said, The retroactive corrections will affect compensation review eligibility. You'll want to look at that once the audit completes. She looked at him for a moment. She said, That's a very practical thing to say. He said, Yes. She almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that happens when something isn't funny but is, in some very narrow way, accurate. The termination notices went out at 4:30. Brett Ashford's came first, delivered by Kevin Stroud, who Raymond had learned that morning, had known about the access irregularity fabrication, and had delivered the termination anyway. Kevin Stroud's own notice followed 30 minutes later. It was the kind of institutional reckoning that moved in sequence, each piece informing the next. Claudia Voss submitted her own resignation at 3 o'clock, apparently on the advice of someone who had told her the next 30 minutes were going to be worse than leaving voluntarily. She was not wrong. Brooke Langford's situation was handled separately, as Raymond had said it would be. The investigation into her oversight role was assigned to an external firm. It would take time. Raymond understood that this was not the satisfying kind of resolution, the clean, immediate kind. It was the kind that moved through process, which was slower and less certain. He had said as much in the atrium without dressing it up. He was still in the building at 5:30 when Margaret Ossie came to find him. She told him the audit team was in place. The floor access had been preserved for review, and the 7 flagged employees had been personally notified that the process had begun. She said Carla Nwaneri had asked whether the retroactive review would include her January performance evaluation. Margaret said she had confirmed it would. Raymond picked up the box, his box still with the mug and the cable and the photo, and looked at it for a moment. He said, How did the Denver team do on the Kaufman account while I was here? Margaret said, They closed it. He said, Good. He took the cable out of the box and put it in his jacket pocket. He left the box on the desk. He took the elevator to the lobby and walked out into the early evening, where the air was slightly warmer than it had been that morning and smelled like rain that had already passed. He called his daughter on the walk to the car. Nora picked up on the second ring and said, How'd it go? He said, It went. She said, Did you have to fire anyone? He said, A few people. She said, Were they bad? He considered this the way he considered most things, not quickly. He said, They made choices that were bad for the people around them. Whether that makes them bad, I don't know. It makes them responsible. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's sort of what my paper's about." He said, "I know." He said, "How's it coming?" She said, "Better." I changed the argument. He said, "What's the new argument?" She told him. He listened. He said she might be onto something. He got in the car. He set the mug on the passenger seat because the box was gone and it needed somewhere to go. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the car, in the fading light of a Friday evening, and thought about the 11 floor employees, 7 of them, who had come in that morning not knowing what was about to change, and who had gone home that afternoon with something different than they'd had before. Not resolution. Not yet. The audit would take weeks. The corrections would take longer. Some of what had been taken from them couldn't be given back cleanly. Time doesn't work that way, and neither does institutional memory. But the record would reflect what had actually happened. That was what he could do. Make the record accurate. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking structure into the early evening traffic, and the city moved around him the way it always did. Indifferent, continuous, full of people making their own calculations in their own rooms, and Raymond Carter drove home.